Hello there. This topic came up recently in a Zoom session about how the Ogham Grove was discovered or realized. And so I thought it'd be quite interesting just to put it on record how it came about and yeah, and also to deal with the criticism of some people that there is no such thing as a Celtic tree calendar. And I'll talk about that at the end. But the Ogham Grove wasn't a contrivance, and how it came about might be quite interesting to people. So I'm just going to bring up the PowerPoint to share some pictures and tell the story. So originally, I was not interested in a Celtic tree calendar. I didn't set out to create one at all. From about 2010, I had got quite interested in whittling. And my interest was really tree lore, more than the Ogham, more than a Ogham year wheel or a calendar. Those thoughts weren't in my head at all. I looked at the Ogham, you can see on this piece of wood from 2010, purely as an alphabet and purely as, like I say, an avenue into learning Celtic tree lore. And actually, I didn't get a lot out of it, but I carried on whittling anyway. My point is that for best part of 4 years, I was happily whittling wood and being creative with no interest really in an Ogham year wheel. Here's a piece of apple made into a prayer fan. I made lots of prayer fans and wands and keepsakes called kepens. So really, my interest was artistic and creative. And yeah, and then I always had an interest in trees anyway, but the Ogham was a rather abstract thing to me. You know, I was more familiar with the runes, really. But I had an open mind towards the Ogham. But like I say, I didn't set out to create a year wheel. That just wasn't there. So how it came about was completely accidental, or maybe that's the wrong word, providence. You know, there were a few things that came together to bring it into being in a way. So I was interested in trees and I was being creative trees, but I have all of my life been interested in the occult and occult symbolism, ideas of alchemy and metaphysical realities and all the rest of it. So my brain is a bit of an odd space anyway, you know, and the people I interacted with in Glastonbury were of a similar mindset, you know, so in our own nerdy way, we were kind of occult nerds or alchemical symbolism nerds, or, you know, the meaning of esoteric ideas, which are far away from ideas of a Celtic tree calendar, really, and nothing to do with wood whittling. You know, wood whittling was me just daydreaming, being peaceful. And, you know, maybe when you're whittling a piece of wood, you're thinking about some of the abstract ideas about the occult world or the metaphysical world. Anyway, around about 2013, 2014, I was studying Rosicrucian intrigues. And Rosicrucianism kind of officially began in the early 1600s. And it was a secretive order of, and you had to be secretive in those days, because if you weren't Catholic, you were likely to get burnt at the stake, you know. So these were people interested in the metaphysical reality, the spiritual reality of life, but not wanting to be suppressed by Catholicism, you know. So an underground movement called the Rosicrucians came into being or presented itself to the world, and there's intrigues with that. But their symbol is the rose, you know, and the rose was always a symbol for secrecy, you know. So there's a famous saying, sub rosa, under the rose, sub rosa. So if you're having a conversation with somebody sub rosa, it means it's secret, you know, and you have to be secret with these things or you get burnt at the stake. Now, the Rosicrucianism kicked off kind of officially in the early 1600s, and then in the 1700s it got absorbed into Freemasonry. And I was quite interested in the symbolism of a Masonic, what would the word be, position in Scottish Rite Freemasonry called the Knight of the Rose Cross. Really, I was just interested in the symbolism of the rose and the rosy cross, and the knight with the rose cross on his chest in Spenser's Fairy Queen is interaction with the fairy otherworld, you know. So this, and the court of Elizabeth I, all the troubadours had roses on their chests and stuff. There's got all this occult symbolism with the rose was present and then absorbed into Freemasonry. Anyway, by the by. So there's something called Scottish Rite Freemasonry. It has 33 degrees, you know, different ranks of initiation or achievement. And one of them is called the Knight of the Rose Cross. And it's the 18th degree. So again, this had nothing to do with the Ogham, nothing to do with whittling wood. It was just me thinking about the 18th degree and what's special about it, you know. And of course, it's to do with geometry, and I'll come to that further on. But simplistically, then, if you just have a circle, you know, a circle is 360 degrees. And if you divide that circle by 18 degrees, the Knight of the Rose Cross, you end up with 20 equal sections. So 18 degrees times 20 is 360, a circle. And it creates the symbolism of the rose cross. You know, this diagram of a 5-petaled rose on a equal-armed cross is defined by 20 equal divisions of a circle, 360 degrees. And that was it. Again, I wasn't thinking of the Ogham or anything, but I had kind of in my own head cracked a code that the 18th degree or the 18 degrees and geometry and circles creates the symbolism of the rose cross, you know, which is nothing to do with Christianity. It's to do with Venus more than anything, the goddess of love, the goddess of nature, the rose queen. Again, sub rosa, we don't talk about it. This was around about 2013, and at that time my dad in his later years started writing a book based on the Ogham. There's actually a series of 4 books, and each book is a different alphabet and a different time period in British history. But book 1, the alphabet for book 1 was the Celtic Ogham alphabet. And of course, the Ogham has 20 letters. And I promised my dad that I would illustrate his book, that I do an illustration, one for each letter of the Ogham alphabet. But of course, this coincided with me playing around with Rosicrucian symbolism and dividing a circle into 20. And there was no contrivance or premeditation. Again, it was an accident. These two events happened at the same time. I was mucking around with 18 degrees in a circle, and Dad decided to start writing about the Ogham, and I agreed to do 20 illustrations. So that was all in my head at the same time. So quite naturally, I put each of the Ogham trees around in a circle, because the 18 degrees divided the circle into 20. So this first rather, I don't know, Glastonbury, hallucinogenic or whatever, a psychedelic rose has 20 petals or 20 leaves, and each leaf's got one of the Ogham letters in there. So that was it. I wasn't thinking of a year wheel. There was no premeditation in this. It was just thinking, oh, a circle divided by 20, and here's the Ogham alphabet with 20. So that was it. Again, I wasn't thinking a year wheel. Now, around that time, a very good friend of mine, Alan Royce, since about 2010, he was a very close pal. We would spend hours talking together, and his mind, amazingly complicated mind, and fully into Celtic history and Roman history and Etruscan mystery and ancient Persian mystery rites and star law. And, you know, I learned so much from Alan, tons of star law complexities and stuff. You know, he was part of the social network of friends that I had for the best part of 20 years. And we were all into zodiacal mysteries and star law and stuff. So, you know, he was a big part of my psyche, my mindscape, and his ideas and my ideas blurred together with so much research that we did together. Anyway, I showed him the Rosicrucian circle divided by 20, and I put the 20 Ogham trees around it. And it was Alan, not me, it was Alan who saw this patterns of 5. You know, each of the Ogham letters has a numerical value. The Ogham is 4 groups of 5, and each group, there's a letter that has 1 stroke, and a letter that has 2 strokes, and a letter that has 3, and another one that has 4, and one that has 5. So it's a numerical thing. And this is what Alan, in his moment of genius, spotted, what he called the patterns of 5. Now, this is a complicated diagram. I've got a simpler one in a minute, but this is my psychedelic rose with the 20 leaves. And Alan put these crescent circles there. He connected the 1s and the 4s, because 1 and 4 make 5. And he connected the 2s and the 3s, because 2 and 3 make 5, and called that the pattern of 5s. And the 5s are unique in themselves, they're complete in themselves. So it was staring at what Alan had done to my rose that this pattern became very clear, you know. And again, it is what it is. It's a numerical formula, a numerical code. But to my mind, as soon as I saw what Alan had done with his patterns of 5, it screamed at me, this is a year wheel. You know, again, I wasn't looking for a year wheel. I was only put Ogham around it because of Dad's book, and it was Alan. Alan didn't even say a year wheel. He just did these patterns of 5. But the equal armed cross, to me, just said winter solstice, summer solstice, spring equinox, and autumn equinox. And the smaller circles where the 2s and 3s are joined look like they were holding the cross-quarter festivals, what we would call Imbolc, Beltane, Lunacy, Samhain. I mean, it's one of those moments you think, oh, it can't be real, surely that's crazy, you know. Anyway, there is an old way of looking at the year. This is from Egypt, the Temple of Dendera in Egypt, and it divides the year into 8 divisions. You can see clearly. It might be unfamiliar to lots of people, but the main disc in the middle is the night sky. It's an Egyptian, Greco-Egyptian representation of all of the different constellations of the night sky of the northern hemisphere. But a year wheel is also the night sky, because the stars relate to the turning of the year, you know, and a year is planet Earth orbiting around the sun, and seasonal stars come and go. So the stars tell us a year story. You know, most people are familiar with being born under a zodiac sign, you know, it might be a Capricorn or an Aquarian or something, you know, so people have that basic grasp that at different times of the year there's different constellations, you know. So anyway, my background with Alan and others was all the star law and stuff, so we take all that stuff for granted. But a year wheel, very common. So this is it in a more simple way, you know, that simplistically the year can be divided into 8. You know, you've got the winter solstice, summer solstice, spring equinox, autumn equinox, and the cross quarters. That's all it is, you know. So going back to the pattern of 5, maybe because I'd spent best part of 20 years, 15 years looking at star law, that imprint was on my brain. So as soon as I saw that, I just saw it as a year wheel instantly. Anyway, it wasn't looked for. But as soon as that idea was there, then I expanded my original psychedelic rose and I put the zodiac around. And now I'm not saying the ancient Celts followed the zodiac. I'm not saying that at all. But they did observe the solstices and equinoxes. So it's just a way of marking the year around the 20 letters of the Ogham, which are a numerical code that suggest a year wheel. So firstly, then, anyone saying there's no evidence of a Celtic year wheel, bollocks. You know, this system, the Ogham, has been used since the 4th century, if not earlier. The standing stones with inscriptions date to the 3rd and 4th century. So this numerical formula of 4 groups of 5 is as old, at least, as the 3rd century AD. And I would argue it's a formula for a year wheel. We'll come back to that further on. So when was it, 2014, I did a tiny little booklet, 28 pages, and this was the front page, just to explain, put it out there, this idea that the Ogham makes a formula for the year. You know, I hadn't yet really focused on the trees. You know, it was just a year wheel formula. That was the front cover. That was a back cover, and the back cover's got Alan's patterns of 5 on my psychedelic rose, so on. So from then onwards, 2014, I started to look at this thing with, I guess, more peaceful mind. You know, at first you have that eureka moment and you think, oh, it's crazy, that's brilliant, you know, and then you kind of sit back and start looking at it. Now there's some amazing patterns. Like one of the first patterns was that on either side of Beltane is oak and holly. I should say that the sequence of trees that goes around the circle dates back to 1390 at least. So there was a book called the Book of Ballymote, which was compiled around about 1390 AD in Ireland. It's a word, compiled. So it was compiled from various manuscripts. So those manuscripts are older than 1390. It's just when they were all compiled together. In the Book of Ballymote, there's a section called the Oracept Nanices, which in English is translated into the Scholar's Primer. And that is the tree list sequence of birch, rowan, alder, willows, ash, and so on. So that tree list dates back to 1390 at least. It was older than that because the Book of Ballymote was a compilation of older manuscripts. But how old the tree list is, we can't say, other than, you know, it was part of a compilation that was put together in 1390. So again, coming back to the idea that there was no such thing as a Celtic tree calendar, call that into question, because quite clearly, to me anyway, to my mind, the Ogham is a formula for a year wheel. And since 1390, those 20 divisions of the year have been credited to trees. So anyone saying there's no such thing as a Celtic tree calendar, or it's not authentic, they need to look at this, you know, and I'll come to why they condemn things like that, but they might be quite ignorant of the Ogham code that defines a year wheel and how old the tree list is. It's 14th century, 1390. Anyway, on either side of Beltane are oak and holly. It's just where they land when you place the tree list around the wheel. And Beltane famously, throughout England anyway, at Beltane, there are battles between the Oak King and the Holly King for the May Queen. You know, so that's played out in the Ogham. That was the first pattern that kind of grabbed my awareness, you know, and then even more deeper patterns began to show themselves. I thought it would be fun to draw the grove as trees, each tree in its position. So this was my first attempt at doing that. In the foreground towards us is the apple tree for summer solstice, and directly opposite at the far end of the grove is a great big yew tree, you know. So, and to the right of the yew tree is a birch tree with some fly agaric mushrooms at the base. You know, this was drawn in 2014 or 2015. So when I was drawing this, something grabbed my attention, and it was that if you look at the apple tree and two trees to the left, there's a stump with ivy growing on it. So I had to put ivy on something, so I just put it on a kind of stump. And two trees before apple on the right is meant to be a holly bush. You know, holly, hazel, then apple, then grapes, grapevine, and then ivy. But anyway, the ivy and the holly in the foreground and the yew tree in the distance was screaming to me again. It was trying to tell me something, that there was a connection between ivy, the yew tree, and the holly tree. And then I realized what it was. It's a pentagram. Now, again, this isn't my contrivance. This is the medieval tree list placed around the Ogham formula for a year wheel, you know. And when you do that, the evergreens make a pentagram. Now, there's a slight oddity to this, that there's an odd one out, and there's only 4 evergreens in the whole system. There aren't 5 evergreen trees, but the 4 evergreens, holly, ivy, pine, and yew, hold the positions of a pentagram. The odd one out is the willow, willow tree. But like I say, there aren't 5 evergreens, there's only 4. So that was strange, and that grew, you know, deeper patterns. There's interlacing with this. There's a rose family pentagram, and it balances the apple and the yew tree, winter solstice and summer solstice. Fascinating. In total, there's actually 4 pentagrams interlaced. You know, if you look at this diagram, the darker green pentagram is the evergreen pentagram, and the yellowy green pentagram is the rose family pentagram. You know, and following on from that, there's also, what you actually have is 4 pentagrams, and each of them are anchored on winter solstice, spring equinox, summer solstice, autumn equinox. So the autumn equinox with the elder tree is the red pentagram in this diagram, and the ash tree in the spring equinox is the white pentagram. There's 4 pentagrams interlaced. Now, I can't say more than that at the moment, other than the pentagram, of course, is Venus, and become very aware throughout all of the trees of the Ogham. There's lots of hidden pentagrams, like in ivy berries, like when you cut an aspen twig, you know, there's little pentagrams, not in every tree, but lots and lots of them. So takes you back to Sub Rosa and Venus, because Venus is the 5-petaled pentagram, you know, and the awareness of all of this accidentally came out of Rosicrucian studies, and that still haunts me, you know. Now I think that the overall figurehead for the whole grove, to my mind at this moment in time, would be Nematona, she of the sacred grove. Well, she of the sacred grove is just nature. It's Venus, you know, it's Mother Nature, it's all of the flower goddesses and so on. That is subjective. That's just what I'm seeing in it, you know, and that's kind of where my brain is going to drift towards, because Dame Venus, or the Rose Queen, is also Renaissance expressions of the fairy queen and the other world. And I think the Ogham is very much about the other world. So that it came from the Rosicrucian studies is intriguing in itself. Maybe I should do a video on that one day. Here, if the geometry is, if you do a circle and then use the radius of that circle to create the first veil, second veil, and third veil, these are just measurements, okay? But they are esoteric symbolism as well. But the geometry is that light shining down, you know, like the radiant brow, the light of inspiration shining down from the third veil, 3 radiuses up the geometry, sacred geometry, 18 degrees wide, light of the rose cross. That light, as it hits the second veil, becomes 24 degrees. As it hits the first veil, becomes 36 degrees. And when it hits the center of the circle on the material plane, the physical world, it's 72 degrees, which is dividing a circle into 5. You know, so if you were so inclined as a Rosicrucian or a Knight of the Rose Cross to visualize the light of Venus, nature, the Rose Queen, shining down upon you, you would imagine it emanating at 18 degrees and then coming through the veils. You know, these are the kind of Sub Rosa that we don't talk about, but they're ideas that were already there. Now, it's not known for certain, but a popular theory with the origin of Rosicrucian mysteries. There's a famous book called The Rosicrucian Enlightenment by Francis Yates, argues that the Rosicrucian movement was placed into being by the Elizabethan astronomer, alchemist, magician, Dr. John Dee. He's kind of like Elizabeth I's Gandalf, you know, or Merlin. And anyway, in 1580, he wrote The Trumpet of Venus, that, you know, and coming from the court of Elizabeth, where everyone was having the Tudor rose upon their tunics, you know, the symbol of the rose was part of their non-Christian esoteric occult intrigues stuff, you know. Now, curiously, in 2021, finally finished all of the illustrations for Dad's book and had it published. But book one of Dad's story is only the first of 4 books. So I'm now trying to get ready to do book 2. But there's four books, and each book is an alphabet. And so book 1 was the Ogham. Book 2 is the runes. And I've got a crowdfunding campaign at the moment to try and get book 2 launched. And book 3, the alphabet, is the ecclesiastical Latin alphabet of medieval monasteries. But book 4, most spookily, if you like, you know, this is just Dad, and Dad's died now. He died a year ago. Book 2 is the Enochian alphabet of Dr. John Dee, which is a bit strange, you know, but, you know, indirectly, my own esoteric journey is going to take me back to John Dee and the Rosicrucians and that Elizabethan interaction with the Rose Queen or the other world, or however you want to perceive it, you know. So those hidden aspects of Venus as a goddess would have been in Welsh lore. John Dee himself is Welsh. The Tudors have a big Welsh thing, of course, with them. The Tudor rose comes from all of that, really. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that's just an explanation of how the Ogham Grove came into realization. Wasn't a contrivance, you know. But when it came, I was really excited. I put it out there like I did, and started getting some criticism from 2 different places, really. And I wasn't prepared for that. I was surprised, you know. It was kind of naive or ignorant, really. So since the 1940s, there has been the idea of a 13-tree Celtic tree calendar system. So people that use that, and they might have used it since the 1940s and 50s and 60s, and, you know, younger people might have studied with older pagans from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 1990s, and they've all been told that there's this 13-tree lunar 13 moon months year wheel system. And I was quite ignorant of that, really. I hadn't really taken it on board. And so when I put out the Ogham Grove as 20 trees year wheel, various people said, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. It's 13 trees. The Celtic Druidic calendar is 13 trees. So I had to go and learn all about that. And I'll talk about that in a second. So I'll talk about it now. The 13 tree system was invented by this man who is a genius and brilliant visionary, Robert Graves. He wrote a famous book called The White Goddess, and it's a fantastic book. He was very clever, Celtic revivalist, classicist, who wrote about classical mystery traditions, and was a brilliant poet. And people don't really understand what he was doing with the book The White Goddess, and it had a massive impact on the world of modern paganism. So there's a lot of things in that book that are wonderful, genius, and people have taken on those ideas as kind of building blocks for modern pagan beliefs. There's nothing wrong in that. I'm not criticizing that. But what Robert Graves was looking for, and this was his own pursuit, this was his own journey, he was pursuing, as a poet, his ideal goddess, his muse, who he equated with the fairy queen in different traditions, and there's so much in that. But simplistically, what he did in the White Goddess, whilst chasing after his moon goddess, was he took the Ogham, which was always a system of 20 trees, but because he wanted a 13-month moon system, he removed 7 trees, and that was his decision to do that. And again, there's nothing wrong in that. That's his magical system. It's how he chose to do it, and he shared his ideas, but it only dates to the 1940s and the book The White Goddess. But here's the thing then, if you've got 20 trees and you only want 13, so you're going to get rid of 7, how do you decide which 7 to remove? So already you're in slippery ground. And it's because of that, and because there's no evidence for the 13 tree calendar until the 1940s and Robert Graves, there's the second lot of criticism where academic people, quite rightly, say it's nonsense. There is no such thing as a Celtic tree calendar. Primarily, they're reacting to Robert Graves and his 13 tree system. So now that is out there, lots of modern day students of Celtic academic studies say, oh, Robert Graves, no, there's no such thing as a Celtic tree calendar. And they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater because they're not aware of the numerical formula of the Ogham making a year wheel, which I've shown, or even that the tree list dates back to 1390. So on the one hand, there's 2 lots of criticisms of the Ogham Grove, and I'm used to it now. I don't worry about it anymore. And doing this video is just a good way of putting a final nail in the coffin with it all. So here's the thing then. The Ogham Grove is a modern 21st century way of working with the Ogham, but it's based on the 20 letters of the Ogham being a numerical code for a year wheel. Now that can be traced back to the 4th century, not as a year wheel, but the 20 symbols having a numerical value make a formula that creates a year wheel. Make of that what you will. And also the tree list that's used in the Ogham Grove dates back to 1390. So, critics can be critical and say there's no such thing as a Celtic tree calendar, and that's fine. I won't worry about it. The Celts, yeah. Anyway, here's before I move on, here's Robert Graves' system, and here's one of the big problems with it. At the top, you'll see birch, Now, Birch begins for Robert Graves on the 24th of December. That might be simple enough in your brain, you know. So he's taken the winter solstice, which is usually the 20th or the 21st. Then you get a 3-day standstill, and then a new year begins on the 24th or 25th of December. So he's chosen the 24th. But he's presenting it as a 13-month moon wheel, moon year. So how often is the 24th of December going to be a new moon or a full moon? Not that often, you know. So that's one of the big problems anyway. Even if you could prove it was older than Robert Graves, you know, why would it begin? Why would a moon cycle begin 3 days after the winter solstice? You know, that is hardly ever going to be a full moon or a new moon, you know, because a moon cycle is always going to be new moon to new moon or full moon to full moon, however you want to do it, you know. So it just doesn't work, you know. Ironically, with the year wheel of 20, the moon visits all 20 trees, you know. It's just a different cog in the machine. So the sun spends a year visiting all 20 trees. There's a year wheel, the sun, and the moon visits all 20 trees every month. And the cog of the moon is a month, you know. So yeah, that you haven't lost the moon with the Ogham Grove. There's new moons and full moons, just like there always is, you know. But anyway, back to this then. The formula is that what's more natural, you know, is it so heretical to take the Ogham, which is 3rd century AD, and place it in a circle? You know, what could be more natural, more organic than that? So it's not even saying that each symbol is a tree. Right now, it's just 20 symbols. Each has a numerical value that creates these patterns of 5, and it makes a year pattern, an equal armed cross and the cross quarter festivals. And it's just from using the Ogham and placing it in a circle. That's not complicated. It's not complicated at all, you know. And I don't see the outrageous heresy in it. The Celts, as a culture, they had a circular mindset. You know, they lived in round houses. They decorated things with circles and spirals. Their way of thinking was circular, you know. And of course, the elephant in the room we're not talking about is the Druids. You know, the Druids refused to put things down in writing. So go back to this. It's not writing as such, but, or before it's a writing system, it's a numerical code for mapping out a circle, north, south, east, and west, and the horizon and the stars. And the Druids did observe the stars, you know. So this is almost a mathematical formula from a culture that refused to put things in writing. The Druids, you know, who met in groves and nemata circles, sacred circles, and lived in round houses, you know. So anyway, there you go. I'll just stop that. Trouble with all these things, you can just go on and on and on. So in 2014, I did the little booklet. That's what it was. It was just a stapled booklet done at the printers in Glastonbury, Ogham there. And just to get the idea out there, there's my crazy roses, you know. And there wasn't a lot of tree lore in there. I wasn't thinking tree calendar as such. I was just putting out that it does make a calendar wheel. And then in 2014, I did this book, small, and then I expanded it in 2017. I made it bigger. So that, I don't know, was that about 40 pages, became 200 pages. and it was full color. Lots of pictures in there, lots of full color pictures. There's the Crazy Roses again. Pictures from my dad's book and so on, and pictures of whittling. And anyway, so that was 2017 that I expanded. But because it was full color, it was a bit pricey. And because it was pricey, I then did this, which is just a tiny little booklet, just to, in black and white, just to, again, put the information out there for people. So I haven't done anything since 2017, and it's a few years now, 6 years. What we've done since then is we've been doing the Ogham Grove books, where we're just focusing on one tree in a year, so that's been a massive project. But this year I am publishing a new book, hopefully in the summertime, and it's called Deeper into the Ogham Grove. And I've really ploughed through the Irish lore. There's 50 pages just on the archaeology of the Ogham stones, and there's the earliest written evidence of the Ogham and its appearance, and how various academics have presented it and stuff. But I've tried to make it simple and chatty. I don't want it to be a boring book, but it's got everything that a beginner needs, in my opinion, and in my mind, it's my finish there, because I want to go into deeper studies and investigations. I don't want to be writing books for beginners, so this book is kind of the package of everything I've learned since 2013, 10 years now, and then from that book I'll then specialize into star lore or herbalism or symbolism and so on. But equally, I've got to do Dad's book 2, book 3 and book 4, and so my brain is going to be taken into the runic realm for 24 drawings for Dad's book, and some years down the line I'll be in Elizabethan England with Dr. John Dee and his strange Enochian alphabet and doing artwork for that as well. So the journey isn't over, but hope you've enjoyed this. This was an explanation of how the Ogham Grove came into realization, and again, it is a 21st century modern day way of working with the Ogham, but its roots, its foundation is the mathematical formula of the Ogham making a year wheel, which I would argue is the 3rd century AD. Since the Oghams existed, it is that mathematical formula, just placing them around in a circle, the simplest thing to do. And the tree list is medieval. So anyone saying there's no such thing as a Celtic tree calendar, take it with a pinch of salt. Don't worry about it. Mainly they're reacting to Robert Graves and his idea of 13 trees. And he wouldn't worry about it either. It was his magical system. It worked for him. And it works for lots of people. So, these not criticizing it. I used to get defensive that people were criticizing my system of the 20 trees. It's not my system. It's ours. It's just sharings of patterns. But now I'm happy, there's a 13 tree system from Robert Graves, and there's a 20 tree system, which is modern. But it's, the 20 tree system, I believe, my own personal belief is that the building blocks are ancient. The building blocks are 3rd century, Iron Age. So arguably going right back to the Druids and a culture that didn't use writing. That's a really important thing. So they didn't use writing, but they measured the stars, so that they had a way of calculating. So the mathematical formula for groups of 5 for plotting out a circle isn't writing originally, but it's perfectly druidic, a culture that refused to use writing, you know. And maybe those symbols, maybe those 20 mathematical symbols always did represent trees. We don't know. You know, the tree list was compiled in 1390. How old it was before then, it's up to each individual, you know. Anyway, there you go. Thank you.